What's up guys, it's Bias13 here, and today I'm basically going to show you guys how to overclock your Samsung Droid Charge, and don't drop that. But yeah, this is the Samsung Droid Charge. If you look in the back, that's there, this thingy, and I mean the overall shape is Samsung. Yeah, so Samsung Droid Charge. This is going to be 1.3 gigahertz overclock. Root access is required, however you don't need to actually install any kernels. So I'll put a link in the description to a guide, a written guide on how to actually root your device. And it's very easy. Basically, you update to the ED2 update, and from the ED2 update, you just go ahead and downgrade back to ED1, and that ED1 version is pre-rooted, so that's basically how you root it. There is an ED2 root, but it is a lot more difficult, the ED1 root. It definitely works. The only thing is that every once in a while you'll see the ED2 update thing pop up, but it's not too bad. So once you have a rooted Droid Charge, you are going to need to connect to Wi-Fi, or 4G, 3G, whatever you want, and go ahead and open up the Android market. After you're in the market, you're going to go ahead and search for Tegrak Overclock, Tegrak, and this is basically an overclock app that loads a kernel for you into in order to overclock your device. And they basically only have Samsung devices, however they do include the Samsung Droid Charge. And I believe this is the only way to actually overclock your device. There are overclock kernels, but they actually don't overclock your device. The only kernel I believe that's available for the Droid Charge as of today, November 1st, is the Peanut Butter Jelly Time one, which I believe only undervolts your device and gives you a voodoo lag fix. So after you've installed Tegrak Overclock, go ahead and open it and you'll get a little screen like this. One downside to the free version is that you actually can't set your overclock on boot. You'll actually have to load this every single time you reboot your device. But I mean, it's not too bad. It's really easy to do. The premium version lets you do that. It also lets you play around with your voltage, and it'll let you play more freely with your core frequencies, especially if you have a Samsung S2. It'll let you play with your core 1 and core 2 frequencies, so you can the first core, say, overclock to 1.5 gigahertz, and the second core will only be at 1 gigahertz, which gives you 2.5 gigahertz in total, but obviously it'll drain less battery than a 1.5 overclock for both. So once you've loaded this up, go ahead and click the Load Overclock Module button right there. It will be in white, but I've reloaded it up. After that, you can go ahead and go to CPU max frequency. Mine, at default, it'll be at 1 gigahertz. The maximum you can go up to is 1.3, and that will basically give you a 30% increase. And this does actually work. I've run a quadrant standard on this, and I'm going to go ahead and run one here also. If you go down to the scaling, you can actually set the governor, which tells your processor to either use the CPU on demand. So say you switch from browsing the internet to playing a game. Obviously games will use more of your CPU. So it'll say, okay, boost up the frequency to 800 megahertz compared to 200 or 300 in the web browser. Now, it is a little bit slower than if you had on performance, which means it always runs at a pretty high speed, more than you really need, and then it'll jump up immediately once it sees that you need more speed. Conservative makes things run at basically the minimum that they need, and it's basically how your phone already is. Next is power save, and it's almost like conservative, but it's a more drastic version of it. And user space, I believe, is that it just does whatever it wants. I have no idea what user space is actually, but yeah. So scaling max and min, I don't really suggest playing with max because you can kind of just do that with the max CPU frequency. So you can set the scaling minimum to say how low you want your CPU to run at. So, I mean, set it as low as possible so you can save battery, and setting as high as possible lets your CPU go through the entire ranges that it needs. But for testing purposes, I'm just going to put this at the max, and we're going to go ahead and run a quadrant standard now. Alright, so here's quadrant standard, it's loading up. Ooh, right before I run this, I do want to end other applications, free up some RAM. So I have about 120 megabytes of RAM cleared, and go ahead and run a full benchmark. So off it goes. And it's completed. Let's go ahead and look at the score. So my device scored an 1166. That's about what I usually get. It's a little bit low. I do usually get around 1250 or so with the overclock. And normally without the overclock, it goes about 960. So let's go ahead and go back home and go back into Tegra Overclock. And now I'm going to set the CPU frequency to 1 gigahertz all here at the bottom. Confirm. And now go ahead and go back to the scaling. 1 gigahertz max and min. Now go back and exit all the applications. Clear up some RAM. Do have an extra 5 megabytes of RAM this time. And go ahead and run quadrant standard again. Alright, it's done, and let's go ahead and take a look at the score. And I actually scored at 1060. Alright, so you probably don't want to drop your phone on like that, but 1063 is a lot more than this thing usually gets. If you guys have a Droid Charge, a lot of you guys know that it runs around 950-ish on a quadrant standard, so for some reason it decided to jump up 100 megahertz or 100 points in quadrant standard today. But that might be because I did set the min and max frequency to 1000 megahertz, and I put the governor onto performance, so that might have helped it a little bit. But either way, you do get a score increase. So it's about 20 to 30% increase in performance. Now, what that means when you're actually using the device. So I actually ran out of memory on my EO60D right here. The card is full. I didn't really feel like having to go and transfer it over when there's only about 1 minute of video left, so I am using my Flip Minnow. And basically when you're scrolling left and right, you will notice there's a little less lag, and when you have programs open in the background, they tend to load a little bit faster. And as you can see, it does load a little faster, and open applications. Everything seems to be a little bit smoother, and yeah, so basically smoother, better performance, especially when you do this pinch to zoom thing. It does lag a lot less. If you noticed before when you did this, as you pinched it inwards, it actually take a few seconds for it to actually do what it's supposed to do, and that was just me missing right there. And same thing for the applications menu. So overall, you can get smoother performance. Battery life isn't affected too much. You lose about 30 minutes if you're running at 1.3 gigahertz on performance mode. And as for stability, there's no really big issues. I mean, probably about once every 3 days, your phone might randomly lag and freeze up and reboot, but that's actually not that drastically bad, and I'm guessing that's because of the overclock. It might be because of the phone itself. I'm not really sure, because sometimes Droid Charges can be a little bit finicky. But overall, stability is pretty decent. Nothing really badly major. And as for device, the heat of it, running right now, it is at 40 degrees Celsius, which is 15 degrees Celsius below maximum. So it's not running, it's running pretty decently. Never had this thing actually overheat yet, even when I'm doing tons of stuff and having the device plugged in. So overall, I definitely would get this thumbs up. Faster performance is definitely good. You can also couple this with the Gummy Droid ROM, which I'll put a link in the description to the guide. Might put a video description up soon, or tutorial. So combine that with the overclock and you should get a much faster device. So that's it for this video, guys. Vise13 signing out.